First is to just introduce to those of you who have never seen this format before that this is an exhibition round, and we're going to have a judge who is going to serve as Speaker of the House. You'll get to see some of the protocol that the World's Debate has. Some of you have experience in other formats, and that's great because we always like the critical mind that that builds. But this format's a bit different than policy debate. So what I would like to do first of all is just to have our different coaches introduce the debaters, and then we'll describe a little bit about the format. I won't go into it too detail because you'll see the format in progress. Okay, so if we want to start with who is the first government team?
I believe the first government team is Mandy Frank and Lucas Caress. First opposition team is Karen Nelson and Sam Richard.
The second government team, sorry about that, is from Cape Cod, and that is Emily and Mike.
And I'm very proud to be, my name's Alfred Snyder, I'm very proud to be debating with Corey Pace today.
Woo! Okay, so you can notice we do a lot of banging in this format. That's perfectly normal. The other thing you're going to notice is that people will stand up and talk during other people's speeches. That's also perfectly normal. Those are called point of information. I'm not going to go into too much depth about that. Just sit back, relax, enjoy the round. And I will now introduce our Speaker of the House, who will begin the debate. This is Steve.
I'll knock for myself. I'm not above that. I'd like to call this House to order to debate the motion. This House believes that nuclear weapons should be abolished. I'd like to remind all the speakers in this exhibition debate the time is 5 minutes. After the end of the first minute, this is the sound you will hear. That means points of information are permitted. Before the last minute, you'll hear this sound. And then when you hear this sound, it means wrap up your thoughts and yield the floor to the next speaker. So without any further ado, I'd like to call the Prime Minister to open up the debate, define the debate, and open up the case for the first government team. You're fine. No, you're good.
Doomsday. Time is imminent. This topic is no laughing matter. At any second, at any time, nuclear weapons go off. Now, how do we want to talk about this topic? We have a plan that we'd like to present to all of you. First of all, we think that nuclear weapons should be abolished. By abolished, we mean dismantled via NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We think that the best agency to oversee this is the International Atomic Energy Agency. We think that the NPT is the best format on several different levels. We think that those countries that have nukes should slowly but surely disarm them. We think that those countries that don't have nukes should never obtain them. And we think that this should be done over a long period of time and be enforced by the UN. But I'd really like to focus on the frame of this debate today, ladies and gentlemen. We don't necessarily foresee the enforcement mechanism as the matter that we want to debate. We want to debate the morals and the principles of this round. We think that whether enforcement is possible is not really the issue at hand. We think that whether we think that this would be a good idea, that all countries should abolish nuclear weapons, that is what we want to focus on. So I have two arguments that I'm going to present to you, and my partner Lucas is going to present a third. My first argument is going to talk about the immorality of nuclear weapons, and my second argument is going to discuss the global bonding that will arise out of this. So firstly, nuclear weapons are immoral. The only time that nuclear weapons have been deployed was catastrophic. We saw this in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We think that nuclear weapons target civilians. There's no way around it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is immoral. Nuclear weapons cannot be deployed without blowing up innocent people, vaporizing innocent people. The damage is undoable. We cannot retract what we have done after a nuclear weapon has been deployed. There's radiation and there's long-term medical consequences. We think that this can be avoided. If we abolish nuclear weapons via NPT, disarming them, dismantling them, we think that this Dr. Strangelove scenario can be avoided. We don't think that that option should be there. We think that there are other ways of dealing with differences between countries. We don't want the option to exist that cannot be retracted. We think that, tuna,
So how is this morality argument any different than the firebombing of Dresden or the firebombing of Tokyo with conventional weapons?
We do think that conventional weapons are bad. We agree with this. We will not disagree with that statement. But we think that nukes are the way to start. We think that we need to work from top down. We got to start with the big ones. And that is why, as part of our plan, we think that the key nations, the world powers, should be the ones that do this first. We think that the United States, or any other country, the major power players in the world that have nuclear programs, public nuclear programs, for that matter, should be the ones to disarm this first. We think that that'll send a positive signal, which I'll discuss in my second argument, but I'd like to finish this argument first. We also think that nuclear weapons are immoral, specifically different than conventional warfare, because they paralyze the environment as well. We think that in today's world, today's society, we really need to focus on that. Not only are we saving lives by abolishing nuclear weapons, civilian lives, may I remind you, but we're saving the environment. Now, what happens when a nuclear weapon is deployed? What happens to the environment? The environment is history. And think of what would happen if a nuclear weapon were deployed on large surfaces. We think that that is a risk that we're not willing to take. The world as we know it could change like that. And we just don't think that there's enough reason to even have that option. So that brings me right into my second argument. We think that fulfilling the obligations of the NPT by key nations is a good thing on 3 different levels. We think that it strengthens global resolve. We think that by the key nations denuclearizing first, we think that that sends a signal. This brings a global bonding. This is a common ground for countries to work towards. We think that, and my partner's going to talk largely about the difference between rich nations and poor nations and how this divide is really bad, but we think that by key nations, by the world powers denuclearizing first, that's going to be like, look, we're willing to do this, come with us, join us. And we think that that's ultimately going to be the best plan of action. So I'll remind you quickly what I've said in my speech. We think that the IAEA should oversee the abolishing of nuclear weapons. We think that the NPT, those fulfillments should be fulfilled by all nations, part of the UN. And we think that this is a good thing because nukes are immoral. There is no excuse to have that bomb, to have that capability. And we think that by all nations doing this, specifically the key nations doing this first, we think that that's going to set the signal for common ground and give other nations a goal to strive for. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. And now I'd like to call to the podium the leader of the opposition to open up the debate from the perspective of the opposition.
Start this off by addressing some of the points that the government has brought up. In their plan text, they talked about using the National Proliferation Treaty, the Atomic Energy Act, and enforcing it with the UN. How can we enforce these acts with the UN when they have so many problems already? The UN is not a stable system set up so that they can actually enforce these things. They talked about disarmament, not obtaining this, and having this long period. These aren't specifics. These aren't actual actions that we can enforce to get rid of this problem. They talked about morals and principles, how through global bonding we can strengthen this global resolve. They're thinking in the fact that any second nuclear weapons can go off. They haven't thought about the other factors. The Cuban Missile Crisis is a great example. This was a conflict where you were in a dead heat, basically. Where were the nuclear weapons going to go? And JFK took the time and we worked it out. There wasn't any nuclear crisis. This was a revolution. Now, to get on to my arguments. Now, Oppenheimer, the father of nuclear weapons, believed in their power and their capability to produce positive changes in the international system. To gain support for his cause, he turned to Albert Einstein. This man is arguably one of the greatest physicists and mathematicians in history. This statement should speak for itself. Now, we are arguing here that mutual ownership prevents deterrence in conventional military buildup. These are some of the main principles of this. Mutual ownership prevents this conflict. When you have two nations, two bodies that both have nuclear weapons, they are in a dead heat. There's going to be no conflict. It's called second strike capability.
Point of information.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that it's called mutual assured destruction and not what you said? And that basically means that at any moment we could all be obliterated?
No, sir. Thank you for bringing up that point. To expand upon what I was saying, when you have two bodies with nuclear weapons, you have this dead heat. There isn't the fear because if you strike one nation, then you yourself would be striking back. And why would you want to hurt your own country? We don't have the technology right now to actually stop nuclear weapons. So why would you want to cause your own problems for your country? Now, to further this, you cannot just make believe that nuclear weapons don't exist. Once the genie is out of the bottle, there's no putting it back in. So we're basically saying here that you can't uninvent something. Nuclear weapons exist. We can't deny that. We need to take this into consideration. We may be able to stop the production currently, but we have the technology now, so it will always exist, so we will always be able to produce these weapons. Now, my partner is going to go on to address how the policies of larger nations towards smaller nations are hypocritical. This is one of the main principles that we will be talking about in the first opposition. Now, to summarize some of the points that I have made, the first gov has talked about a specific plan to attempt to abolish nuclear weapons. They haven't provided any specific criteria. They haven't provided a time period. They've talked about the National Proliferation Treaty and how will this be effective. They haven't answered this for us. Now, they've talked about morals and principles. You don't base actual actions and actual events in the international system on morals and principles. You base it on facts. Yes?
You don't base national and international things on morals. What do you base them on?
Thank you for bringing up that point. What I was saying is when you have, obviously with the leaders of in the international system, have basic beliefs about how it should function. That's true, but when they're making decisions, they look at the factors, they look at the facts. They don't base it on their morals and beliefs. They base it on what exists. That's the point. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about the father of nuclear weapons and his thoughts on this, and provided how Albert Einstein has supported the existence of nuclear weapons. And now I'm just going to leave you with one statement. E equals MC squared, bitches.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to remind the House that knocking for arguments you like is definitely welcomed by the chair, and I'm sure by the debaters as well. I'd like to now call to the podium the Deputy Prime Minister to refute and continue arguments with the government.
Yeah, India.
Everyone ready? All right. I would like to begin my speech by refuting some of the things that were said by the first opposition, and then I will go on to make my independent point, which is that nuclear weapons create a two-tiered system in the international community, which promotes inequality, exploitation, and we believe on the government side that that is a bad thing. First of all, just going on to some of the things said by the first opposition, their refutation for our claims was that, how can we enforce this? And I do believe that the first speaker specifically got up here and said that while these are valid concerns, this is not the issues that we should be debating here. We should not be debating logistics here, okay? This is not what we're about. We're here to debate morals, principles, and what we believe should be. And we are proud to stand on that case. And if they cannot engage us on such a level, then that is incredibly regrettable. Okay, moving on to actually some of the new material that they brought, some of their arguments. I found it really ironic that she would actually use Oppenheimer in her argument, because it was actually Oppenheimer himself who, upon realizing the weapon he had created, named it as one of the greatest mistakes in his life. What did he say upon realizing the incredible massive destruction he had unleashed? He said, "I am become death, the shatterer of worlds." And that is what nuclear weapons are about. They are about death and they are about shattering worlds. But you disagree, Alfred.
No, I'm just saying, he was quoting from the Hindu scriptures.
Absolutely.
And in that there was death. He's not making a personal statement.
But I do believe he did state multiple times on the record that if he had known the incredible damage and carnage that he was unleashing by by discovering these weapons, Oppenheimer, was that he would not have done so. And in fact, he named it as one of the greatest regrets and mistakes of his life. Moving on. Their point is about deterrence. Is about if there are two countries with nuclear weapons, they will deter one another from using them. But this, first of all, we have a couple problems with this point. First of all, we do not believe that nuclear weapons are chips to be played in an international poker game. We do not believe that you can deal with something so massively harmful and dangerous that you can merely use it as a negotiation tool. We think that is incredibly dangerous, and we think it is incredibly sort of the wrong way to take our international community. Additionally, this idea of deterrence relies on a bipolar system, and she gave us examples from the Cold War when there was a bipolar system, but unfortunately for her, right now we live in a unipolar system where the United States is the top dog, and therefore, who is going to be there to deter us? We're not facing off against, one ideological opponent or anything. This is a completely different world, and that she's using examples from a bygone era which frankly do not apply. I'd like to move on to my new points. Okay, nuclear weapons create a world of two tiers. One in which people have nuclear weapons, and another world in which people do not have nuclear weapons. There is the powerful and there is the powerless. Because nukes are not like other weapons. Their use is irrevocable, as my partner stated, but they're also expensive and therefore exclusive. So what does that mean? That means you have a lot of countries who have the best, most powerful weapon in the world and an incredible amount of leverage, as was stated by the opposition. And then what do you have? Everybody else. Everybody else in the world who doesn't have these weapons. Everybody else who has to be under the thumb of those that do. Yes?
Sir, are you arguing that the United States is the only country that has nuclear weapons?
No, but
absolutely
not. Thank you. We are not the only nation that has nuclear weapons, but we are the only type of nation. The first world nation, the Western nations, the rich nations, okay? And what happens when the rich get richer? Well, we all know the poor get poorer. And what do we think? What kind of international community would we like? Would we like to have an international community where we further exacerbate the difference between the haves and the have-nots? Or would we rather try and take this into another level in the new century where we say, you know what? Maybe it's not right that we are constantly kind of doing our own thing and saying, this is us. What are you going to do about it? Because every time you have negotiations between a nuclear power and a non-nuclear power, you have the nuclear power, the rich nation operating from a position of strength, and you have the poor nation operating from a position of weakness. For example, the West has been trying to stop Iran from developing a nuclear program. Why? It's not because we think that they're bad, which we are, because we don't have any problem holding nuclear weapons ourselves, but rather we don't want them to be negotiating from a position of weakness. We want to keep them down. We want to keep them under our thumb, where we have the power. More power than them. And let us remind ourselves, Iran does not want a nuclear weapon so they can blow up the world. They merely want to be recognized. They want to be operating from an equal plane, an equal playing field. And it is that exact, you're out of order, and it is that type of philosophy, the reason people want nuclear weapons is because they are not equal to us in our eyes. Well, here on the government side, we would love to say that, you know what, maybe it's time to get past this antiquated bipolar idea of a system. Let's move on to a new world where, we can be equal. We don't need to rely on our nuclear weapons to show our strength, to show our courage in the world. If we really want to move beyond and try to, stop this exploitation and this, honestly, imperialism of poor nations, then we must propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to call to the podium the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue the case for opposition and refute the government's argument.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly my pleasure to continue this debate for the opposition side, and for once in my life, argue for nukes now, because they exist, they're going to continue to exist, and we should accept this reality in the world that we live in. First off, I'm going to start off my speech by just refuting the matter that was brought up by Mr. Lucas Caress, then I'm going to extend my partner's arguments, and then I'll bring in my new matter. Now, first off, what he talks about is, I really like his argument. He is basically talking about the haves and the have-nots, which is what my new argument is going to be. But see, he misinterprets it entirely. He wants to argue this on some kind of abstract, fundamental level where we say we should abolish nuclear weapons because they're immoral and we should all be on this level playing field. Ladies and gentlemen, I say that the bar has already been set at having nuclear weapons, and the only way a playing field is the only way we can have an even attempt at a level playing field is that if we keep nuclear weapons in here, because countries that have them aren't going to want to give them up, and countries that want to be more powerful will want to have them. You're not going to start this process of disarmament just by saying, okay, everybody, let's not have nuclear weapons. Let's just start over from square one, because as my partner mentioned, the knowledge exists, you can't uninvent the atomic bomb, and so therefore it's a necessary evil in this world. Mandy.
Yes, but just because the knowledge exists doesn't mean we have to use it. We can't make an active effort to disarm our nuclear weapons. That doesn't make any sense.
And because the knowledge exists, disarmament will perhaps just a symbolic step in saying that we shouldn't have nuclear weapons, but because the knowledge exists, nuclear armament could occur when things get ugly, and this is evident when when the larger nations feel pressured, they will definitely rearm themselves if they felt it to be necessary. Now, I'd like to talk about what my partner mentioned, which is this concept of deterrence prevents an actual larger scale war. And the Golden War mentality still persists today because it is relevant. Even if we don't have this dichotomy between the United States and the Soviet Union, we now have this more multilateral system where a bunch of countries have nukes, and yet we see that we are not using them. We aren't using them because of this threat of one country attacking another country and then that country retaliating in the second strike scenario. It's the fear that keeps people in line. It's the fear of what could happen, and we say this fear is necessary. Because as Lucas talked about, we don't want nuclear weapons to be poker chips on the international gambling table. I say, well, what else can we use? Back in the day, it was soldiers. Who's got the bigger army? Who's got the more advanced weaponry? Who's going to march into battle to put their beliefs on the line? We don't want to have to lead to large-scale conventional war when we have this threat of nuclear weapons that prevents not only that, but also the use in and of itself. No thank you, no thank you. And as she mentioned, the knowledge exists, the genie's out of the bottle, cat's out of the bag. You can't actually uninvent a nuclear weapon. No, sir. I'd like to get to my new matter at this time, which is that we need to accept the political realities on two fronts, both on disarmament and in terms of nuclear energy. Now, the policy of disarmament to smaller countries seems entirely hypocritical. Iran, North Korea, they're seeking these weapons, but at the same time, the United States says, no, you can't have these weapons, but they're not going to stop until we give up. But we're not going to stop because we are in a position of power, and we don't want to give up that power. So nuclear weapons will continue to be sought. Yes, ma'am.
But Sam, isn't that part of the plan that the key nations give up their nuclear weapons first, and that sets the example, which is my second argument of the common ground?
Yes, that's what you talked about, but I'm saying that's entirely not going to happen. You're saying we don't want to argue logistics, but ladies and gentlemen, logistics are a big part of it. It's not going to happen because we are in this dominant position of power that we don't want to give up, and that these countries are in a position of power where they're trying to come up and gain more prominence on the international scene. So if larger nations were to be the ones that abolish nuclear weapons, that would make nuclear weapons more valuable overall to smaller nations, minor nations, dictators, and other kind of fundamental regimes that seek them. And as I'd like to talk about, nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is very important to the state of our global climate in general. Nuclear energy is one of the safe and efficient ways that we can generate electricity without helping to contribute to greenhouse gases. And you cannot abolish nuclear weapons without getting rid of nuclear power, because the nuclear fuel needs to be reprocessed and can be used to make weapons. So you need to get rid of all of it. You can't cut it down the middle and say, no weapons, but you can have energy. No, it's either all or none, because ladies and gentlemen, on the opposition side, we recognize the political realities and that we embrace them and say, nuclear weapons are here to stay.
Thank you very much for that. We now would like to open up the closing team's debate by calling the member of the government to offer an extension and take the debate in a direction.
First of all, I'd like you all to thank you all for coming out here today and seeing this debate. We, as the government, believe that nuclear weapons should be abolished, and the opposition has been stating a lot. Basically, we haven't seen many arguments for the existence of nuclear weapons. They haven't been backing up the reason why we have them. They've just been saying that we can't do anything about it. Well, that's kind of an impotent way to go about this topic. What we're presenting is this is a moral conflict that we should be addressing in that way. We shouldn't be looking at it as, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. This is really just a backwards way to go about it. It just isn't acceptable. We have to take control of our destiny and make choices that will lead to a better future for everyone on Earth. This is a major issue, if not maybe the most important. No, thank you. It might be the most important issue that we ever decide. The potential for the disastrous misplaced rise of power is something that is threatening the world. As my colleague presented, America is actually the world's leading superpower. It isn't a bipolar world anymore where we have Russia and America. America is the world superpower. That being the case, the balance has been thrown off, and the world would be much safer if America led the way and showed its neighbors and the world what it would mean to have a world without nuclear weapons. Some of the arguments that have been presented by the opposition, such as the UN is not able to enforce this action that we're proposing, is not really the case. The UN has a legal charter to control and manage the nuclear armaments of the world. Yes.
Sir, you mentioned that we cannot say what we can and can't do, and that the U.S. should be telling the world, saying the world should do without nuclear weapons.
That's right.
How can you actually provide an answer? You're saying, what can we do, what can't we do, and the U.S. should show us. So what's the actual answer? Can you tell me this?
I don't really understand the question. The legal framework already exists within the UN to patrol and control nuclear weapons proliferation. If we simply follow this to its logical conclusion, non-proliferation means reduction in total amount of nuclear armaments around the world. Follow that to its logical conclusion, and that means no nuclear armaments around the world, and that would mean a safer world, a world that we don't have to worry about nuclear Armageddon. Just in case, I'd like to introduce a new point, which is just in case we forget about the seriousness of this matter, the effects of a massive nuclear strike where all the weapons are launched in the world, which is currently the current situation where if one person presses the button, they all go off, which is really kind of an insane way to have things. No, thank you. The current situation is unacceptable. The long-term consequences of that happening, not only would it mean the death of practically everyone on Earth and the end of life as we know it, would mean 10 to 20 years of nuclear winter where the sun would be blotted out of the sky. We would plunge into a new ice age. The whole climate of the world would shift, and it would be the end of our species most likely. This is not, this is just simply not a pleasant scenario to consider, and it should not be an option on the table like our previous arguments where it shouldn't be a bargaining chip. This shouldn't be, this isn't a game. This isn't something that we're willing to stand for much longer. And in conclusion, I would like to say that this is not a necessary evil, and this is something that we can do something about.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to call to the podium the member of the opposition to offer an extension for the opposition position.
Sushi grade.
Morning. I want to start with our new argument that we think is very important. We think that nuclear weapons are an important tool to save the world. Now I'm going to tell you about a scenario, and scientists agree this is not science fiction, this is science. And it's not a question of if this will ever happen, but a question of when, because it's happened before. We believe that nuclear weapons are needed to defend the Earth. Asteroids and meteors pose a substantial threat to our planet. They wiped out the dinosaurs when they hit the Earth. They led to an ice age that occurred 20,000 years ago, in which a huge portion of the existing human population was wiped out. We're scanning the skies currently, but we don't see everything, and we're not sure whether they're coming. We need to be ready for them when they do. What's the result? We just heard about it, nuclear winter, right? A destruction of the environment. All of these things. How do nuclear weapons protect? When we see them, we can attack them with nuclear weapons. We put them on missiles, we send the nuclear weapons up. Yeah, it's so good, there's been about 6 movies made about it. It is that. No thank you. We deflect them so they don't hit the Earth. We bust them up so the small fragments will burn up on as they enter the atmosphere. Now, we'll need to act quickly. We won't be able to, the genie's out of the bottle, but we're not going to have time to reinvent nuclear weapons and produce them. It's going to take a lot of time. Don't think that this is frivolous because it's about outer space. We are a planet, a beautiful blue orb floating in outer space. We know our place, we know the dangers in our cosmic neighborhood, and we have to be ready to do something about it, and these teams won't. Sir.
Do you really believe that an asteroid that may or may not come is more of a threat to the world than mutually assured destruction and nuclear winter?
Yes, because we can't conduct it, and it's not governed by rationality. 60 years of peace. The Cold War had 60 years of peace. No major wars. We may have had some small conflicts, but no major wars. Where was World War III? Nuclear weapons stopped them. And sir, India and Pakistan fought 3 wars, but now that they both have nuclear weapons, they're friends. I'm sure you'll think it's not. You can now take a train or a bus back and forth from India and Pakistan for the first time since the Second World War. That's my new matter. You may think it's science fiction. The scientists would disagree with you. Let's look now and see what the teams have presented. Well, we got this very interesting plan. It was nice to hear that, this is not an issue of enforcement. We don't want to, it's an issue of wishful thinking, right? You can't indicate, if the UN can't impose its will now, how is it going to do that against a country who wants to get nuclear weapons, in violation of this plan? We don't know when. We don't know how. Enforcement's not relevant. Yet her second argument is all about how it will be implemented. And then the second team spends a bunch of their time talking about, how we can enforce it, and the UN. Make up your mind, government. It's not just about morality. It's about preventing war. All war is immoral. You want to vote for the system that has less war. And Lucas says that there are 2 tiers. That's our argument, right? You think the U.S. is going to stop pushing other countries around if they don't have nuclear weapons? Absolutely not. They don't solve that problem at all. What about our arguments? Our first team has indicated that we're going to prevent war. India and Pakistan, 3 wars, not since nuclear weapons, 60 years of no major wars during the Cold War. Nuclear weapons are the reason for that. And then the last speaker for the opposition has a really good issue. How are we going to get electricity in the 21st century? We'll probably need to use nuclear power to do that. And once you have nuclear power, the byproducts of that can become nuclear weapons. So we need to fight global warming, we need to fight an asteroid attack, and we need to use the threat of nuclear weapons to guarantee that we don't have a global conflagration, because this fantasy that someone's going to push a button and the whole world's going to be annihilated, no one's going to push that button, and if one person pushed it, no one else would push it. Nuclear weapons may be immoral, all weapons are immoral, but these are so threatening that we're not going to have major wars unless we vote for them.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to call to the podium the government whip to conclude the debate and summarize the arguments for the government bench.
Here's how fun to follow. Okay, one major point you brought up was nuclear power. I believe as a nation and as a world, we're moving towards different forms of energy besides nuclear power. We're looking at, solar power, natural gas. There's a plethora of different things out there. So I really don't think that that's an issue. And I also really think that we're not talking about energy, we're talking about weapons and things that kill people. So I'd just like to start off by summarizing what the first government team has already brought out. Doomsday was the first thing that the first speaker on the first government team said, and I think that that's really something that you should just take those words and really think about them. Major impact from nuclear weapons. And this team, after we've said that, the opposition goes and says that there are 4 nukes. I think that's probably the most insensitive thing I've ever heard. If you take some kind of horrible disaster caused by that, and then you turn around and say that you're 4 nukes, I feel that's nothing cute. A little insensitive. Oppenheimer said that it's one of his biggest mistakes, and then they turn around and say that Einstein supported it. Well, if Einstein supported polio, I don't think that I would support his position. I'm sorry, he's a very intelligent man, but, I don't believe everything I hear, and I don't agree with people just because of who they are. We've also said that as a starting point, we would like to disarm them. We're not saying that we're going to be able to eradicate them instantly by implementing any kind of plan. We've said as a starting point, we would like to disarm them. And we believe that the U.S., being a major power, should initiate that we should go and disarm our nuclear weapons and get the other major powers to do the same thing. And we realize that, countries such as North and South Korea, are going to, if we were to disarm ours and we didn't get everyone on the same page, that could be a problem. But if we take this as a starting point and we go to the UN and we start a process, I really think that it could be moving us in the right direction. Morality is also something else we talked about. This team the opposition has said that decisions on a national level and an international level are not based on morals. I find that hard to believe. In some totalitarian, regimes, I can see that maybe being somewhat true, but the U.S. makes its decisions based on morality.
Do you think George Bush makes his decisions about Iraq based on morality?
Order.
I think that any major leader is going to take, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody. I don't really know how I'm supposed to respond to that, so I'm going to we need to take control of our destiny. As the United States, we need to set an example and protect ourselves and help protect the world. The nuclear weapons do give an unfair advantage. We're not going to try and use them as a bargaining chip. It leaves other countries at a disadvantage, and you may see them, regardless of their positions on certain issues, as being less important simply because they do not have nuclear weapons and they can't threaten us with them. I believe if we were to eradicate them, we would be able to take everyone's opinions on a national and international level and it would really promote global bonding and allow us to all voice our opinions and be listened to with the same amount of respect. The opposition has also talked about asteroids and meteors that could wipe out the world. Those are things that are pretty much out of our control. They're things that we look for as we look for nuclear weapons. They're things that we try and keep track of, and they're things that are out there and are a threat, and so are hurricanes and tsunamis. I really think that that's kind of out of left field and something that you should really think of as being kind of irrelevant. So in conclusion, we believe that nuclear weapons should be eradicated, and we suggest that this is done by disarming them and then moving in the direction to get rid of them altogether. We believe that it is immoral to have them, and that we need to take control of our stance in the world and of our destiny, and that they give an unfair advantage, and that it would really promote global bonding. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to call to the podium the opposition whip to conclude arguments for the opposition debate, bench and the debate as a whole.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The point of this exhibition debate is to show you, the new people, how to debate. And I think it's a shame that only one side of this debate actually showed you how to debate. With an earlier example on showing you what not to do. So I'm going to start out with 3 questions to illustrate both the clashes between the houses. My first question is, how's the plan going to go about? The second is the importance of nuclear weapons. And the third is, what do we actually lose if we did abolish nuclear weapons? So the first question, like I said, is how is this plan going to go about? We think on the opposition side that this debate is about practicality rather than morality, like the first government would have you to think. That we think that it was a cowardly move on their part, the first government, to come up here and just say, well, we're not going to talk about enforcement. We're not going to talk about actually how this plan is actually going to work. We're just going to talk about why this plan is going to be good. And then the second government comes up and spends almost their entire time talking about trying to defend that this is a possible thing. So we think there's a misconnection between the houses. The second question is the importance of nuclear weapons. And we on the opposition side pointing out that nuclear weapons are used for diplomacy, and there's this poker analogy that's been used throughout the whole entire debate about we're not going to use them as poker chips. And my question is, why not? Why not use nuclear weapons as a form of diplomacy? And their response is that we need an equal playing field. Ladies and gentlemen, do we really want oppressive governments and tyrants to be on an equal playing field of more supportive governments of democracies and things like that? Do we really want them to be on an equal playing field? I don't see no good from that plan. Go ahead.
But you would prefer that those rogue nations actually have nuclear weapons instead?
Well, if they had nuclear weapons too, then it would be, like I said, an equal playing field. I don't want an equal playing field. I think that people that have general good and general diplomatic ideas, they should use nuclear weapons to carry through these actions. And we also said, my partner said that nuclear weapons stop wars. Yes, nuclear weapons kill, but we use the example of the Cold War. There's lots of small battles, but there was no World War III. There was no destruction. No, thank you. There's no doomsday, as the first government would like to say. We also used the example of India and Pakistan on how once nuclear weapons came into play, that there was actually some sort of diplomacy and an alliance between the two countries. No, thank you. The third question is, what do we actually lose from nuclear weapons? And like we already said, like the first opposition said about you can't uninvent something. The genie's out. You can't put it back into its cake, so to speak. So we think that we brought up the example of nuclear energy and how this is going to be a need to power the next century of this overpopulated world.
The genie's out of the bottle. So if someone were to re-release the bubonic plague, would you just say, "Oh, okay, no problem"?
I think that's quite irrelevant on the subject of. I'll bring up my point. No, thank you. I'll bring up a point on that. We're talking about the technology here. Nuclear energy is sort of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons is sort of an idea, and you cannot destroy this idea. So that like the first opposition said, we're going to use the technology for the power. So you can't, erase what we have already invented. So, like I said, we brought up also the importance of asteroid protection. And the last whip said, "Oh, this is irrelevant. This is nothing." But I don't think the dinosaurs thought that stopping asteroids from hitting the world was irrelevant. So this clearly shows that this is an actual problem. So, Mr. Speaker, what this shows is that on the opposition, all our arguments are full of practicality, diplomacy, and forward-thinking ideas. Well, on the government side, it's all about just morality and dismissing things that, dismissing prevention, dismissing things that are actually going to be problems in the future. So on the opposite side, we have shown you that although it's a clear fact that nuclear weapons kill people, they bring about diplomacy in the world. We use real-world examples of this. We think that this debate is solely about morality and practicality, and we think that we have shown this, and that is all the reasons to vote opposition on this.